no onde goike, no puyanawake, puyanawa bakebu, puyanawa bakebu, no onde goike, no puyanawake, puyanawa bakebu, puyanawa bakebu, no kano panare, panare, rukombai chaike, chai.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. Hope everyone had a good, restful break. My name is Kasia Malinowska. I work for Open Society Foundations, and it's my pleasure to chair this session. We walked out of this room with a very compelling plea from an indigenous person who was telling us to be thoughtful, to be wise in the way ayahuasca travels throughout the world and the relationships that people are developing to it, particularly in the global north. So I think our session dovetails beautifully with that plea. We have three excellent speakers who have made major contributions to that precise discussion. About availability of ayahuasca outside of the Amazon, our first speaker is Ken Tupper, and he's a researcher who also is a government official. Who I think does not use his government affiliation in the work that he does around ayahuasca, but I find it quite amazing that those two areas of work can function so successfully next to each other. So Ken is going to talk to us about the expansion of the global responses to the expansion of ayahuasca. Ben is a filmmaker, a good friend, someone who has thought about this issue also for a long time, who heads an organization in Spain, ICEERS, who brought us all together. So special thanks to Ben for this opportunity. And his presentation is a reflection on UDV's process of legalization. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, of course. Ayahuasca's turning challenges into opportunities. And Jeffrey Bronfman, very well known to the ayahuasca community, and it's a pleasure for me to meet you. I never had the opportunity. We'll talk about the reflections on the OVD's process of legalization in the US and the current global ayahuasca challenges. Again, I'm very excited to chair this because the session that we ended with, I think, was a very moving sort of testimony to where we are today in the global ayahuasca movement, and I hope we'll have an opportunity to not only hear from you, but also hear your thoughts on how we can respond to that plea. So we'll start with Ken.
Thank you, Kasia. Can everyone hear me? Is this mic working effectively? Can I switch the other mic? Yeah. Is this better? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Kasia. My name is Kenneth Tupper. I'm an adjunct professor in the School of Population and Public Health at the University of British Columbia. As Kasia mentioned, I also have a government job, but I'm here, I want to make it clear, I'm here speaking on my own terms as an academic. In no way do my opinions reflect the views of my employer. I want to talk a little bit, well, first I want to acknowledge that I am not an expert in ayahuasca. My knowledge is more on sort of public policy issues and some of the philosophical issues that I've engaged with through my academic research. The real experts, I think, are some of the people on the stage yesterday, the indigenous maestros and the ceremonial leaders in the Brazilian churches, the people with considerable experience. But in my academic work on this topic, I was interested in what is ayahuasca and how do we address it from the perspective of its globalization now emerging out of the Amazon in the 21st century and creating challenges for governments in different parts of the world, liberal democratic states in particular, that are trying to uphold competing principles of human rights, public health, criminal justice, and free market capitalism. So when ayahuasca is kind of put in the middle, it's pulled in many different directions. So the answer to the question, what is ayahuasca? You know, on the one hand, it's a vine with many different names in different cultural traditions here in the Amazon. It also refers to a brew prepared from that vine with various admixture plants, but most commonly now Psychotria viridis. Of course, it's also a plant teacher, or a planta maestra. It's a traditional medicine. It's a religious sacrament. In some of my work, I've also described it as a cognitive tool. But I'm most interested in my talk today about its construction as a drug. And we heard yesterday people saying ayahuasca is not a drug. But of course, that's not the opinion of the sort of dominant power structures in the international drug control regime, or drug of abuse, a phrase that I find somewhat problematic. Kind of like saying a drug of abuse is kind of like saying a condom of rape, or a pen of extortion, or a knife of murder. It's confusing the tool with the purpose for which it's being used. I'm very also interested in ayahuasca as a material commodity and its emergence in sort of this sphere of commodification, part of the transnational global marketplace now, for better or for worse. So, as I mentioned, from the international drug control regime, because of the presence of small amounts of dimethyltryptamine, it's considered in many countries a controlled substance. Now, dimethyltryptamine, as many of you know, exists in our own brains in very small amounts. It also exists in many other plants in small amounts. But when it's prepared into something, and that key word there is preparation, then the question is, does it constitute a preparation of an illegal drug? Now, the International Narcotics Control Board has determined that it does not constitute a preparation, the ayahuasca brew, according to the interpretation of the 1971 Convention on Psychotropic Substances, which is the international drug control treaty that lists dimethyltryptamine in its schedules. However, the INCB, although its determination is that ayahuasca is not a preparation, its interpretations are sometimes exceeded by different governments that can always prefer to have excessive penalties or control mechanisms in place beyond what the international treaties put into place and the interpretations of the UN bodies. So in many countries, as you probably well know, ayahuasca is considered a preparation of dimethyltryptamine, which creates all kinds of headaches. Now, the INCB has also, even though its official interpretation is that ayahuasca is not a preparation, it has issued a report suggesting that other plants, including ayahuasca, but other plants like khat and iboga, are of concern, and I've got a few quotes here from the report. Plants such as ayahuasca are often used outside of their original socioeconomic context to exploit substance abusers. As a result, increased trade, use, and abuse of such plant material have been noted in many countries, and the board, the INCB, recommends that governments remain vigilant and should consider controlling plant material at the national level where necessary. So in some ways kind of inciting governments to consider greater control mechanisms, which in many cases means criminalization of the people who are involved in the use of plants like this. So, of course, another UN body that's involved in international drug control is the World Health Organization, but to date, as far as I'm aware, and I'm not sure if anybody has any determinations different, that the WHO has not yet taken any steps to investigate ayahuasca and its potential health benefits or potential harms. There is, of course, emerging scientific research that they could be drawing on to investigate this, but the scientific paradigm of research is in many ways problematic in relation to studying something like ayahuasca, in that the imperatives of scientific methodologies are to have something that is standardized, replicable, and measurable, and the ayahuasca brew doesn't conform very well. They're used to white powders that can be measured and given out in a laboratory context. So although I understand there are researchers who are attempting to apply scientific methodologies to ayahuasca to varying degrees of success. And Jaulio D'Arujo talked this morning about creating a placebo version of ayahuasca to help with the randomized controlled double-blind methodology that's the gold standard for scientific research. But again, doing research in a laboratory is quite different from a ceremonial context in a traditional indigenous context or a Brazilian church context. In some cases, the research on ayahuasca and the sort of published scientific literature is using lyophilized or freeze-dried capsules that are derived from the brew itself. But again, does this actually change the object of inquiry to turn it into something like a pill that can be easily, again, measured and replicated, but perhaps is not the same thing? It sort of removes then the taste, the sensation of drinking the liquid, the sort of immediate digestive sort of impacts of drinking the brew, which may actually be part and parcel of the entire experience. So to take the sort of scientific imperative and apply it in that way might actually, again, be changing the object of inquiry as the research unfolds. There's also the irony that the spiritual dimension to ayahuasca is challenging to science itself. The origins of early modern science in the 16th and 17th centuries was to move away from the religious sphere and to sort of find secular knowledge that everybody could agree to. But it's a challenge when this sort of spiritual dimension enters through the phenomenological experience of drinking ayahuasca. To encounter a sentient being in the plant itself through experience is very difficult for a scientist to quantify and measurably research. There's some irony that much of the scientific research is actually drawing on the brews that have been prepared from the Brazilian ayahuasca churches. So they're actually going back to some of the religious uses in order to create some kind of object for scientific study. And then, of course, there's also, and I'll acknowledge Bia's comment on this, that the process of cooking ayahuasca has a spiritual element to it, that the water is considered to be very important, and the spirits of the plants are sort of brought about in the cooking process. And of course, that can't readily be accounted for through the scientific study of ayahuasca. But of course, in the currency of public policy, scientific research is what gains traction in terms of creating what's called evidence-based policy. So it's a challenge to have the research constrained in the political environment where it's very difficult to do, even overcoming all of the methodological issues I just discussed, even in the political environment, to do research on this is a challenge. And I'll refer to the example in Canada where I was involved with a small observational research project in a First Nations community to study the impact of drinking ayahuasca on addictions with Dr. Gabor Mate. And he was basically shut down, told by the federal government at the time to cease and desist, to stop doing the ceremonial work that he was involved with to treat addictions. So we were able to do enough research to publish a paper with some very interesting findings of potential benefits in that direction. But we weren't able to follow up, and that was over 5 years ago now, with further research in the Canadian context. Again, because the sort of drug control sort of norms make it very, very difficult to abide by all of the regulatory structures that are required to be jumped through to deal with a Schedule I, again, drug of abuse. And of course, the experience of the lived experience of people who drink perhaps should be accounted for in public policy. And I find it interesting, I understand in the process of the Brazilian government's determinations on ayahuasca and the policies that have been put in place here involved accounting for the lived experience of the peoples who use ayahuasca and some of the government officials who were part of the investigations themselves participated in rituals and had experiences that led them to conclude that prohibition was not the way to go, and that some kind of regulatory context to allow ayahuasca drinking is the way to go forward. So in terms of, again, the international drug control norms, the constitution of moving a substance like ayahuasca across a border would constitute trafficking, and there's certainly people who are currently facing legal challenges, potential prison sentences because of their exportation or importation of ayahuasca into other countries. So referring back to the INCB's suggestion that governments need to control this, and I'll use the word control in quotation marks, you know, one way to control, of course, is to criminalize and prohibit, and that's been the de facto way to go forward. Another method of control, and I worry about this, is perhaps to go the opposite extreme of, again, free market capitalism. We could imagine a future that I don't think would be, personally I find kind of problematic, but it's one possible future to create sort of international standards on what constitutes ayahuasca, that it could, measuring the ayahuasca tourism industry could be contributing to the gross domestic product, that there may be genetic engineering and patents applied to new varieties of ayahuasca and or Psychotria and Banisteriopsis caapi, industrial monocultural production, derivatives markets for futures on the vine and the leaf. You know, this fate has been the way that we've kind of seen other plants taken through process of colonialism, other plants taken into the global sphere, and this is what's happened. So we should be very careful about what kind of control mechanisms are imposed through the globalization. And this brings up the issues of commodification that were touched on again yesterday, concerns by indigenous peoples, questions of reciprocity and economic justice. When money gets involved, I came to this curiosity about commodification through a colleague of mine who was a First Nations woman, actually Métis woman in British Columbia, who asked me some questions that I didn't have good answers for. And one of them was, doesn't it profane something sacred to turn it into a monetary exchange? She told me the same thing that I heard on the stage yesterday, that in a traditional cultural context, there's always an understanding of reciprocity, that somebody attending a healing or a spiritual ceremony should give something of value in exchange for receiving something of value, but that money would never be an acceptable medium of exchange, that the idea of reducing it to a mere monetary exchange is somehow very problematic. So I was reflecting on this and sort of delved into questions about, you know, what is of real value. And part of the, many of you know, part of the ayahuasca experience is the sense of it being a gift. The sense of, and the word daime, santo daime, comes from Portuguese, give me. So there's some sense in that there is no measurable value, or no measurable exchange, I think, that can help us estimate the value of what one derives from ayahuasca. But the issue of reciprocity leads to me to question our global financial system and the kinds of money that we are all familiar with in terms of their predication on debt and the compound interest function that's behind that, that has led to a divorce between economy and ecology that is deeply troubling, and I suggest needs to be reconciled in some way in order for us to find a sustainable future. I've dealt with some of these questions in a recent essay that was published in a book recently edited by Bia Labate, Clancy Kavnar, and Alex Gearin, called The World Ayahuasca Diaspora. This paper is called The Economics of Ayahuasca, Money, Markets, and the Value of the Vine. So if you're interested in some of these questions about commodification, I've reflected at greater length in there and provide some references. So I think I'm going to leave it there and turn it over to my colleagues on the stage here and open it up for discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. So I want to speak a little bit, based on the experience and the focus we've been having very much in the last years in the courtroom, really the work in legal defense and kind of what we're seeing there. And it's incredible because when you're here in a conference like this and you hear, the indigenous people speak about what ayahuasca is for them now, or the religious traditions. Ayahuasca is so many things, and it's not just a brew. It's the music, it's the worldview behind it, it's the whole culture. It implies so many things. And the brew is just one element in that whole. And so then when you're in a courtroom and you hear a prosecutor speak about the same thing, it's really a very different story. They speak just about one molecule called DMT, and that's it. And they kind of literally extract DMT out of this very complex cultural practice, and that's what all the the decisions are based on. Like, this is a substance, it's dangerous, and so people are doing drug trafficking and have to go to jail because they are endangering public health. No, that's more or less the story. And of course, it's incredible because a lot of the people who end up in a courtroom, they have a very different idea about what they really are doing. So it's very challenging in working in these environments and trying to support where immediately you basically are dealing with ignorance, no? And Einstein said it is more difficult to break ignorance than it is to break an atom, and I think that's really true. And you really have to try to bring in with the whole scientific, the science is very important, of course, because there's a big fear around this phenomenon. Ayahuasca is very in the center of the stage. It's a bit seen as in the framework of the new psychoactive substances, which are like the research chemicals and the legal highs and the spice. So these are new substances where there's no research, there's no human history of use, who have become popular as a result of prohibition, where people are seeking for alternatives to illegal substances that are legal. And kind of ayahuasca very often is put in that same category. It's like it's a new psychoactive substance, but of course it's a very old psychoactive substance. There's a very long history of human use, and we have quite some idea about how ayahuasca works, what the risks are, and the potential benefits are slowly being underscored by science. So, so really the whole interpretation and situation by the prosecutors about what's in front is always very problematic. And so a judge is in an even more difficult position because they never, heard about ayahuasca before. They, see people in front of them that are atypical, not the type of people they're used to see. And they know that their decision really can have a big impact, because if they decide to free the person, that kind of gives a bit of a message like, maybe it's okay here in this country to work with ayahuasca. So they have a big responsibility. So I start to see our work in that sense in helping, offering perspectives to the judges so that they can make good decisions, no? And as Ken talked also about on a global level, like the INCB, it's really the mentality of, as long as it is in the Amazon, it's fine. It's okay, it's there, it's totally disconnected from the rest of the world. But of course, it's an illusion to think that tradition only stays in, in the global world we're living in now. Tradition and these cultures, they travel and they interact, there's interaction with the other cultures, and they're spreading across. So all of a sudden, from that moment, it's a problem. And so it's not because you're an indigenous person with, from many generations in which ayahuasca and shamanism has been part of your life, that you're more protected than if you're a Western person that maybe has studied in a tradition or is part of a ayahuasca church. For the law, it's all the same, no? And we see that happening. More and more indigenous peoples and many people that are here at this conference are starting to travel. They go to Europe, they go to the US, they do ceremonies, and they're in danger of being legally prosecuted, and these things happen, no? There's been incidents like that. So I think we have to be very aware of that. And Ken was referring to ayahuasca is not a drug. When it travels, it is caught into the drug control system, is the predominant system that deals with this phenomena. So we've been thinking a lot about how can we advance this, no? And how can we push this forth. And so in the defense, except for bringing on all the science and kind of showing that ayahuasca is not toxic, it doesn't create addiction, and the whole aspects of safety, we always have to try to bring in very much this awareness of what we have here is a cultural practice. So our idea was, and also it's a bit at the basis of holding this conference here, is like how can we potentiate this awareness and this whole cultural aspect of this practice on a global level, so that the cultural framework becomes equal or maybe even more predominant than the drug control system approach to this growing phenomenon. And in that sense, it's very delicate, of course. No, it's all out there. Ayahuasca is in the mainstream media. You see it in Hollywood. Silicon Valley discovered it. Famous people talk about it. So it's really in the picture. And I think that's even more why the international ayahuasca community, the people who are working with it and using it, have a responsibility as well, and show an example how working with this can be done in a responsible way, in a sensible way. We're seeing, unfortunately, examples of people, doing or being in the framework of opportunism for the economics or for other reasons, or for personal power. But really, it's a bit like an elephant in a porcelain shop. No, really, all of a sudden, stating yourself as a big company and spreading ayahuasca with a profit-driven, underlying motive. That's giving more the possibility or the excuse for governments to make it illegal, and we're seeing it happening. No, where in countries there's more and more arrests occurring. We see more and more international coordination between countries. And to give you an example, for example, right now, Germany is a bit of a hub of ayahuasca arrests. So we have seen cases where ayahuasca was not even sent to Germany, but was passing through Germany, and where the authorities in Germany said, well, we're going to get in touch with the country of destination and tell them that this is an illegal package and invite them to arrest the receiver of the package. And even more extreme, to contact the country of origin and say the person who shipped this package is a drug dealer and go after that person. So in our work, we're starting to see this type of more coordination patterns between different countries. And now, like currently, I think we're helping about 9, 10 legal cases at this time in different countries. Some of them are, quite known shamans who have been working with ayahuasca for a long time who get arrested. So these arrests really are going up. And nobody knows in what sense the popularization of ayahuasca and the increase in arrests go hand in hand. I don't know. There's not much known in terms of data about how that relates to each other. But I think we have to be collaborating, really thinking about how can we advance this field in a sensible way. No? And unfortunately, we see examples of abuse. Sexual abuse has been a topic that has come up in several environments. When these type of cases come in front of a judge, of course, you have a big problem, because all of a sudden ayahuasca is associated with really problematic behavior. And we are not in a position where a judge or a government can see that one thing is the fact of working with ayahuasca and the other is a crime of rape or sexual abuse or any other problematic behavior. It's the fact that ayahuasca is involved makes it automatically very often problematic. So I think I will leave it here for now and hopefully go into discussion afterwards. But again, I think it's important that the whole perspective that people get here as audience in a conference like this of what ayahuasca really is to the native cultures and to many people abroad, because it's incredible if you compare ayahuasca with mushrooms, for example. They also come from a tradition where there's ritualistic use of mushrooms, but for somehow they have traveled much more as a psychedelic, no, as something you can buy in a shop and then you take it. Well, most people in the ayahuasca community look for taking ayahuasca in ceremonial settings, whether it's shamanic or spiritual or religious. It is traveled in a way along with the ritual, no, and so it's important that we can convey this framing, this cultural framing, I think in the debate, in the global policy debate. So that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you, Ben. Ben, you talked about the experience of multiple countries, and we have one case study that really, thanks to your work, Jeffrey, we can be learning from, and that is your experience in United States effort of legalization. So it would be great if you could share that with us.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon to everybody. As pessoas que falam só português, me desculpe, eu vou continuar falando em inglês, mas eu peço a sua compreensão. I think that's, I love this topic. This has become my life from the day that I had 30 agents of the government of the United States knock on my door and threaten me with criminal prosecution as an importer of dangerous drugs, which would have meant decades in prison for me. This became a very important topic for me in my life. And having had the privilege and the blessing of being able to lead a process whereby we achieved a degree of recognition in a government that was really very repressive up until that point, and able to set a precedent in the United States that has implications really all over the world, I've learned a lot. And I was moved by the work of ICEERS and the work that Ben did in involving themselves in a case of somebody in Chile who was being prosecuted for his work trying to benefit people. And I really identified with those feelings as I saw it in a film that they produced of him describing the fear and describing the sense of losing their family, of losing everything, of spending years in prison for what was an act of conscience. And so I've committed myself not only to the continuing work to bring greater freedom in the United States, but also around the world, because this idea of freedom of conscience, this idea of our freedom to explore our spiritual nature, this idea of freedom to better ourselves, freedom to improve our communities, freedom to work to improve the quality of life on earth. It's a fundamental part of our existence. You know, we're not just here to be employed in different jobs and to struggle to put food on the table. There's a higher purpose to life. And I think that this is something that we all recognize, to the extent some of the light of what's given to us in the ceremonies opens our consciousness to see it. We realize that there's a higher purpose to our life, a higher purpose to our existence. And so making a possibility for that in different countries. Because I was talking today at lunch with some friends, there's really two basic paradigms that are seemingly in competition in the world today. One is a paradigm of repression, of just prohibiting everything and keeping control. The other paradigm is libertarianism. It should be free for everybody. And really neither one of those paradigms, I think, are ultimately in the best interest of our collective evolution. There needs to be some kind of a way of working with possibilities that could be very beneficial, but could also honestly be harmful. And I think that we're dealing with a phenomena that isn't universally positive, and I think that's part of the reason why the international community is concerned about this, is because there have been examples of where there has been improper use in terms of things that have been done using this tea, which is so important to everybody who came to this Congress. There have been incidents where it has been used in ways that harm has been done. There have been reports of people who had died in ceremonies, not as a result of drinking the tea, but as a result of things that had happened around their being there within the ceremony. And these things can be misunderstood. For example, there was a case in Canada that happened a number of years ago where somebody died in an ayahuasca ceremony. And the idea was that it was the ayahuasca that had caused the death. In fact, they analyzed the ayahuasca that had been distributed in the ceremony, and it had toxic levels of tobacco leaves that were also put inside of the ayahuasca brew. And so you have an example of something where the traditional, original uses involved two plants. And then there was ways that people started adding and experimenting and trying different plants with it, and it led to difficulties in terms of affecting someone's health. And while the individual was not imprisoned as a result of it, he was deported from Canada. He's not allowed to return. And he was actually charged with the criminal negligence in terms of his ceremonial practice. And this was an Indian person in an Indian community in a country that is normally very progressive and free thinking in its approach. And so these situations are serious, and they're happening, as Ben was saying, more and more all over the world. And so I think part of the conversation is how can we work together to be able to bring forward another proposal, another way of responding to this phenomena that preserves liberty, that preserves our rights, and at the same time acknowledges the need of there being to have some kind of social responsibility to our larger community in terms of how we work with these things, and the recognition that they can be misused, and how do we put procedures in place or policies in place that constitute what we would consider to be responsible use, to be able to, because we've been involved since our success in the United States. We've been working to apply the approach that came out of our years of litigation in the United States to bring a model forward for other countries. And what ended up happening in the United States was I alluded to the fact that they came to my home. They had orders from a court to seize the tea that had been shipped to us in the United States over many years through the União do Vegetal, where I have my spiritual practice. And they basically challenged us to go to court to prove our right, to prove our necessity under the laws of the United States. And ultimately, we were successful. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States, and unanimously, they affirmed our rights. But the process took 10 years. The process cost several $1 million. The process had huge implications on the lives of the people involved. For 5.5 years, we weren't allowed to realize ceremonies. We realized our ceremonies with water to keep our religious practice alive. But there was no guarantee when we went into it that we would come out on the other side with a favorable result. And then after the Supreme Court ruled in our favor, they required us to work with the government to develop a system of regulation whereby our religious practice could go forward, but the government could maintain some kind of control, some kind of supervision over the way the practice was being administered. And so recently, when we went to Canada to apply for an application, we were proposing a similar system of reciprocal responsibility, where the government assumed responsibility for preserving our rights and our practice, and we preserved responsibility in terms of reporting, in terms of certain care with how the rituals were done, in terms of storage and record keeping. All of these things were part of our showing our responsibility in front of the laws of the government of the United States. And so I've been thinking a lot about, well, what constitutes responsible use? And I'm still thinking about these things all this time. I'm still working on how can we develop a way of presenting this, managing our own lives, and then presenting this to the global authorities in a way that the rights could be preserved, that these cultures could be preserved, and no harm could happen to people. And I think there's certain corrupting elements that I would offer for your consideration that are things that we need to guard against. The first I would say is commercialization. That somehow when the corrupting element of making it a commodity, as Ken was saying, and there being some kind of a monetary exchange in exchange for ceremonies, this is a potentially corrupting and problematic area that I encourage people to guard against. Second is something I think that is related, but in some ways even more important, and that's what I would call taking this out of the recognition of it being something that's sacred, something that's divine, something that comes from a higher spiritual intelligence, and making it into something for recreational purposes or something for something more trivial than that. The respect of these plants and what they can provide to us when they're properly prepared and properly administered, and the inspiration, the light, the understanding that could come to someone's life is something that I think really is a guardianship, that it never leave the context where we recognize that this is something sacred and that we need to proceed with great humility, with great respect, and with great care. And then while I also consider the importance of the research of getting the scientific community involved in studying this as a phenomenon. It's something that within the UDV we've welcomed, and many studies have been done within the UDV. There is a warning that I think Toffoli said earlier this morning about this is far too serious to be trusted to the hands of just the doctors. We don't want to have this be that the medical authority is on top of the cultural authority, the spiritual authority, the indigenous authority, because it takes, just as it takes years of training to arrive at the place where you could be a physician, it takes years of training to the point where you could really be responsible to lead a ceremony using, this sacred tea and know how to administer it within the many things that could happen within a ceremony. And so I think that this is one other element I want to propose, and then I'll conclude my remarks. That one other way that you could identify responsible use is there supervision over the person who's administering it? And is that supervision continue? Is there a training that somebody had to go through to arrive at the place where they have the authority to give it in whatever cultural context? And is there continuing supervision of a person's work after they begin to do that? And I think that's another element that we could hopefully agree is important to maintain. Even those of us who have been entrusted with the responsibility of distributing this sacred gift, that we recognize that we're still very young, that there's so much we have to learn before the great mystery, and to conduct ourselves with humility and realize that we need a lot of help, and we need to share our ideas and work together in order to arrive at a greater understanding. So, thank you.
I just wanted to continue a bit on the things you said. No, and like in ICERS, we have a support service where people contact us after ceremonies, and we, regularly get some people who haven't been supported properly in the deep processes they got in. No? So, of course, in terms of ayahuasca, when we talk about responsibility, we're talking about people who offer a service. They work with the substance, and they hold the ceremony for other people. They promise certain things, no, and they say they are going to work in a certain way. So transparency in that sense I think is very important. No, it's not just somebody taking responsibility over their own lives, and I think everybody has the right to do what their bodies, with their health, what they want. But from the moment you are saying, I'm going to host a ceremony for other people, I'm going to work with other people, you have the responsibility over others. And so it's very easy to give a cup of ayahuasca to somebody else, but it's very difficult when a challenging situation comes up, no? And so unfortunately, we have been in a position where we had to help people who didn't get that support afterwards. So I think that's important to take into account.
Thank you all very much. Couple of questions that I wanted to start with before we move to the floor. Ben, you said that UNODC or INCB sort of are willing to leave ayahuasca alone if it's out there in a jungle. If it's not in North America, if it's not in Europe. Taking into account the tools of globalization, internet and what goes along with it, how are those tools of globalization helping us or actually making it more complicated when we think about responsible use, when we think about availability outside of the indigenous region?
Okay. Yeah, so with the INCB, I was referring to in their report, no, where I don't know if they would touch ayahuasca because DMT is on the list, and that kind of creates a gray enough zone for people to be legal insecurity, you know, when they are working. But yeah, there's this whole mentality of as long as it's far away in the jungle, it's fine, and when it comes to the rest of the world, it becomes a problem. And of course, we are seeing Facebook is a major place where people are advertising ceremonies. You know, when people travel around the world to do ceremonies, very often they put it all over. Facebook ads is a very, you know, efficient tool to get to big audiences. And of course, it is made possible that many people get to learn about ayahuasca, and so a lot of good has come out of the fact that the internet and the new technologies of communication exist, no? Because people have heard about it, have learned, and the possibility to engage in these practices, and often with very positive impacts on their life. But there's of course a big challenge there, because ideally when you go in and do something in your life and something of this intensity, it's very important to be very well informed, to be very, very well prepared. And it's difficult with so much information out there on the internet to know what information is reliable. So, for example, on our website, we got more and more people asking us these type of questions. No, where do I go? What do I look for? And so we decided to put information up about the potential risks, about the potential benefits in a very open way. But you look at other places, and more there are places that look like an expert organization giving you information. but then really there's more of an economic incentive behind, or it's more information to get people, stimulate people really to do it, instead of really informing them and making them take the informed consent. So I think it makes for people, it makes it easier to have access to information, but more difficult to know what information is reliable and what not.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I think a theme that you brought up earlier, Ben, is that the sort of narratives around the emergence of ayahuasca outside of the Amazon really pays heed to the importance of the ceremonial context. That I think the majority of people who hear about and become interested in ayahuasca are not necessarily seeking a recreational experience, or if they are, they're typically disappointed, but they more often than not understand or hear of the importance of a ceremonial structure and seek that kind of experience out. Now, whether they actually encounter someone working with integrity is another matter, and of course there's great difficulties. But it's interesting that that respect for some kind of ceremonial context is really part of the public discourse that's emerging. Also, the other thing that I think is a game changer with respect to the internet as a new medium of knowledge exchange and information is the framing of the policy narrative is very, very difficult to shift for the sort of authorities who might want to try to cast this in a particular kind of light, that the ways that were done, mechanisms used in the past to sort of demonize particular populations of people who used certain kinds of psychoactive substances aren't as sticky now, because the internet allows for a transmission of knowledge. People are able to share experiences and tell their own stories in a way that's very, it's in some ways it's actually collapsing the concept of public and private before our very eyes. Concept public-private distinctions emerged with the rise of the printing press in the 16th and 17th century, but they're now actually, I think, evaporating because of things like Wikipedia and YouTube and just online narratives, things like Facebook. All of these are shifting our sphere of knowledge and information and publicity in a way that's impacting how ayahuasca is emerging at this moment in the early 21st century. So I think that's something to sort of keep in mind as again, the policy framing is not a simple kind of way for governments to tell a story that's going to suit their interests and control.
One other thought I had that I think it's important to remember is the silent partner in all this, and intimately related is nature herself. And when I first came to Rio Branco, it was in 1990, and I came as an ecologist, and I came looking to preserve areas of the Amazon forest. And my first experience with the ayahuasca, with ayahuasca, I realized, or I saw, that this was a way that nature was reaching into the consciousness of humanity in order to be able to get us to reconsider how we were living in relationship to the earth, and to help inform us in terms of our choices. And so I think it's very important to consider that this is also, it's not just a human phenomena of human communities and the internet, and there's also something else going on, which is the planetary consciousness and the planetary health. And I think that the internet is a reflection of something which is going on, which is the unification of the consciousness of humanity, that the internet is the reflection of, but it's not the cause of it. The cause of it is something else that's happening as a result of these times that we're living in, that I think is also exemplified by these plants coming and reaching the consciousness of people around the world and awakening us to more of what life really is for.
So very concrete question, and I don't know if it's a fair question, but very concrete. I have a 20-year-old son who is in college in the United States. They are planning a spring break, and he shows me a printout of ayahuasca centers in Latin America. What do I say to him and his friends? How do you make a judgment? How do you make a decision? What's a good place? How do you get it vetted in a way that is sensible and thoughtful and smart?
Well, we get that question all the time from people, you know, writing us. We never tell them go there or go there, but basically tell them do your research. You know, that is the most important. Do your research and really look out for details. No, and things are very, you know, when there's a big marketing around something, or you know, people are flyering all over. For me, that's a bad sign. No, and also when you decide to go to a certain place to do a ceremony, talk to the people and before ask them questions. No, and the way they frame the work they are doing is, I think, in a conversation, very easy to get out. No? If they say, no, you come here and we give you ayahuasca and all your, you know, problems will be solved in one night, maybe that's not the place to go. No? If they're interested in who you are, in maybe your medical background, your health situation, you know, if they say we have facilitators, we have a psychologist for integration, is that really there? No. Do they have an emergency plan? If there are big centers, specifically if you're deep in the Amazon in a center, do they have an emergency plan? If something goes wrong, how long does it take to get to a hospital? You know, all of these. I mean, going to the jungle, you know, is dangerous in itself in a way. There's, you know, animals there. There's, you know, risks involved. So doing ayahuasca in the Amazon, you know, so really thinking about where am I going in whose hands am I putting my my health, no, or my safety? Those are all questions I think to think. And also, I mean, you know, when you have an incredible experience, a first mystical experience in your life, you see life differently, and you're incredibly helped. Of course, you want other people to have the privilege to also have those type of experiences, but it's not necessarily because I have had that experience that for somebody else is the same. So I always encourage people to make that decision for themselves and really do their research, and then based on that, take the decision. Not because a friend says, you know, I did this and you should do this and it's great. That's not, I think, the starting point. No, this is a serious thing. It's work. No, and I think traditionally, you know, it's called a trabalho. No, it's a working session. It's personal work. It can be very hard. And we see that, and Mark from our organization is doing a course later, and there's going to be some discussion, you know, about this whole aspect of integration and preparation work. And we often see people coming to us who have had difficult and sometimes adverse situations. People who at the end were damaged by the experience, very often because they didn't have the right information beforehand. No, they weren't properly informed. They thought maybe they were going to have this blissful experience, and then they drink ayahuasca, they go to the, you know, straight to their own hell, no, which can be very positive if you're prepared for that, if you know that that's a possibility, and if you have ideas on how to work through that. But if people are not totally informed that this is something else, then they might start thinking, oh, I'm crazy, you know, this is me, and people really can have problems afterwards, no? So my big advice would be do your research and take this very serious.
The additional piece of advice I would give, it would not be for your son, but for your daughter or for yourself. If you're a woman seeking out this kind of experience, there's certain additional factors that you need to know to protect yourself in terms of the risk of unscrupulous male leaders who will exploit women. And I'll refer you to the Women's Visionary Congress has an excellent page on their website in English with advice for women, how to protect yourself, how to ask the right questions, and sort of raise red flags if you're encountering some dodgy types of practices. It's a serious issue that unfortunately is, I mean, it's not the majority, but there's certainly stories that I've been hearing over the years of essentially ayahuasca as a date rape drug, which is horrifying, but it's been happening, so it's important to be aware of.
So before we go to the floor, Jeff, you outlined 3 excellent points in terms of sort of moving forward. Let me try to restate them and correct me if I'm wrong. One of them is to be very wary of commercialization. The second one, not taking ayahuasca out of the divine, that it really belongs very centrally in smart science, smart, thoughtful science, and then Ben added transparency and clarity. Anything else, Ken, than you or anyone else would want to add to that list of 4 in terms of sort of moving forward? Where do we go from here? And again, I asked that question a little bit, sort of being very mindful that a couple of hours ago, Mapu, yes, sat right here where you guys were sitting and was so clear in his plea to do it right. So what else do we need to be mindful of as we move forward to make sure that we do it right?
Yeah, the one thing that I said that you didn't repeat that I want to repeat again is proper training, that you know where somebody has been trained and that they have supervisors and that they maintain a connection to the place where they were trained. A couple of other things that you could also consider is that it's not, the intent is beneficent, that you're working to cultivate virtues in terms of honesty, in terms of fidelity, in terms of integrity, in terms of humility, that these values are something that it's intended that when you're working with it, that we're cultivating virtues, and the intent is not exploitive, not in the sense of financial exploitation, not in the sense of sexual exploitation as Ken was referring, but it's all in a sense of service for the greater good.
I think the issues that I would want to reiterate, in addition to all of the ones that Jeffrey's brought up, are issues of social and economic justice, overcoming the legacies of imperialism and colonialism that are still so damaging to both the perpetrators and the victims, to use very crude language. It's harming everybody that we haven't come to terms with the inequities on the global sphere. Coming to terms with concepts of indigeneity, which is both in the local particular concepts of indigeneity as well as the global. We are all indigenous to the planet, but we need to be aware of the limits to growth, the distribution of wealth, the things of real value, which are not money or gold, but things like air, water, food, and human relationships. So those are, I think, some of the issues that we need to struggle with, and it's got to be simultaneously a bottom-up and top-down process. Bottom-up in terms of individual consciousness awakening, and this is part of where ayahuasca, I think, is really contributing, helping people to understand the ecological context in which we're living, and awakening to a spiritual dimension of our being here on the planet. But at the same time, it has to be structural transformations. Just individually waking up is not going to be sufficient. We have to look for real transformative change at the level of the international and national and subnational governments, and look at issues of power and how it's distributed and who's benefiting from the policies that are currently in place around issues of sustainability and economic transactions, that sort of thing.
Let's turn to the audience. Ria has the mic, and let's take two questions at a time to make sure that we use time efficiently, and get our excellent panelists to respond. Okay, three questions at a time.
I'm just going to make a short comment of myself about what can we do. I think that the setting of this kind of conference is what we can do. So I think that this conference aims to educate researchers, that researchers should not be apolitical, and researchers should not be alienated to community issues. So on the one side, educate researchers about the importance of engaging in dialogues about drug policy reform, and also to get their hands dirty with the problems that exist on the field. And inversely, to educate the practitioners and religious people, indigenous people, on the importance of dialoguing with researchers and helping advance through science a better understanding of what is happening. I'm going to pass my...
Boa tarde. Muito se fala sobre ayahuasca e muitos contam como iniciou, né? Há muito tempo deve ter iniciado. E após esse início, muitas pessoas vêm tomando esse conhecimento e vêm difundindo isso até nos dias de hoje. Muitos povos indígenas antes e agora as novas doutrinas. E paralelo à nova doutrina vem novos valores. Quem é que vai estar no direito de fiscalizar esses novos valores? Quem pode se dar esse direito? Isso é uma pergunta. Outra é, o Brasil tem contribuído muito para o avanço do conhecimento da Ayahuasca nos últimos tempos, né? E nós sabemos que atualmente há um novo governo, há um novo pensamento, há uma nova história pela frente, principalmente com o avanço evangélico. O que nós podemos fazer dessa união aqui, para nós sairmos fortalecidos, com os direitos já conquistados, para não pôr em dúvida, em risco, o nosso futuro?
Thanks. With permission, I'm making a bit of a comment, a suggestion perhaps that we, as a community, start to clearly define an ayahuasca ceremony as something that just involves Kapi and Viridis alone. And because what seems to be happening, from my analysis, is that when there are deaths at ayahuasca ceremonies and the medical professionals and the law and the media are blaming it on the ayahuasca, that usually what's happening in these situations is that the person's been drinking ayahuasca at the same time as some contraindicated substances, in particular cannabis. So if we look at the history of Padrino Glauco's death, that involved cannabis. There were deaths in someone psychotic in Japan, killed some people. In Australia, there's been 2 deaths, 1 murder and 1 suicide, and in both cases they were drinking ayahuasca, 1 with cannabis and 2 with mescaline at the same time. I know as a psychiatry research, I know that MAOIs from the Kapi, they interact chemically with other substances. And so perhaps this is what's emerging as a pattern. It's certainly a bad press that's happening for ayahuasca, but if you look at what's going on, it's not actually the ayahuasca that's the problem, it's this chemical interaction between non-traditional substances, and but the media will blame it for that, and the ayahuasca is getting the blame. And so perhaps as a community we could start to address this issue of admixtures being dangerous for the people that are dying, and also for the community getting held back by legal restraint.
Thank you very much for that wonderful session. One of my questions is to all of you around what we do when we see practices that are problematic in a pre-legislative phase. Let's hope we arrive at a place where we have progressive policy around the world. But now when we see, as a community, problematic practice, giving people the right to lead ceremonies after one night's training, or the very overt commercialization, what can we as a community to do in the context we're now in to protect ourselves from that behavior and our community? Just some thoughts.
I'll address the first question, which I didn't catch the beginning of because it was in Portuguese and I didn't have my translation device on. But I think the question was, who has the right to control ayahuasca? I think that's a fascinating question of political philosophy. And I think we need to discuss questions like that. But I'm personally more interested in how are we going to deal with the real politic of the world that we live in, where we've got power structures that are already asserting sovereignty and the right to control these things. And how do we work within those systems of existing power to advance the idea of some kind of change? And maybe I'm naive to think that that's possible or even desirable, but that's sort of where I guess I'm starting from, given that maybe there will be a revolution one day, but it doesn't seem likely to start today or tomorrow. So I'm still willing to work within the systems of control and through processes of education and sharing information. I guess believe in the idea of transformation from within.
Yeah, I think it's a fact that there's new uses, no, and that people, that different cultures and different practices come together. There's some people working with ayahuasca, combining with meditation techniques, different things. No, this obviously in a connected world, these things are advancing. So in terms of who controls the values, no, of practices. I think new practices should always respect the traditions and know the roots, know where it comes from. And when that's not the case, I think that's problematic. And also I think we have to think, and one thing we are looking at is, for example, in Spain there's now I think 2 or maybe 3 private non-profit user associations. The first one was La Maloca, which was started, where ayahuasca is used. And basically the idea is that it can hold religious ceremony, it can hold indigenous ceremonies or other forms of ceremony, but people coming together, and what is key there is the ethics, the safety, that the user, that the people, the members are totally informed about what the activities are within that association, and that it's not for profit. So profit is not the the idea behind it. There's a level of transparency in that model as well, where the money that's spent and that comes in, everything is documented and clear. So maybe we have to look also at frameworks in which different ayahuasca practices can fit in, but where the ethics and the responsibility and transparency are always like the center.
I see a link between each of the 3 questions. In terms of the first question, who determines the values? I think it's a very important question, and I like the model that's been presented to us here of a conversation, of a democratic participation where we share our ideas and we impress upon one another what we see as truth, and we're open to hearing and learning from one another. I think out of that comes a greater consciousness that comes from listening to people with different backgrounds, and I think that what we find is that there are certain universal truths that have guided humanity for thousands of years, and that those truths are held by the indigenous people, and they're held by the churches, and they're held by ethical users in other environments as well. So I think it's bringing forth those values of what values are coherent with this kind of practice, and what are ways of working with it that are not positive. There was an example here in Rio Branco where as we saw yesterday, several of the major lines of people using the tea in a religious context emerged in this area of Brazil. And there was a time where the government in Brazil was looking at certain prohibitions and controls, and as an alternative, the groups came together and agreed to a certain set of common principles that they would conduct themselves within, among which was what Benjamin mentioned, not using the tea with other plants, using it just with the 2 plants that were common to those traditions, and then non-commercialization, non-financial exploitation as well, and there were other elements as well. So I think it's this ability to bring different people together, recognizing our interests are common. If somebody were to do something that brings harm to, it could bring harm to the whole movement. If something was done irresponsibly in some country, it could affect, a prohibition all over the world. So I think that the model is one of listening to one another, recognizing universal values, that are common, and then not mixing things up, keeping these 2 plants within the traditional origin of how they came to humanity, and come to understand and keep ourselves in the place of students of looking to learn more about how to best conduct this work.
I just wanted to add a little thing. That, for example, in Spain there's an organization called the Plantaforma, and so this is an example of, on a national level, within one context, where different lines of work or different people from traditions, from different churches, practitioners come together and talk about the values, and about, they published an ethics code that they developed for themselves. So there's, I think, again, getting together and knowing from each other how we work, and finding things in common, and then, getting organized as a community, is very important. And I think it's encouraging that on an international level, the community, also through the existence of the internet, is able to kind of get together, and also when there are problems, respond to that collectively. But it's challenging.
Obrigada. Eu vou falar inglês para vocês, só que não posso falar para toda a gente. When ayahuasca is not regulated in a country, beyond what we believe about if it can be protected that way or not, it actually becomes a massive problem. I have 6 years living in Australia. I am a practitioner and a student of these plants for much more than that. And what we see is that if we, because we can put ourselves together with the power of this medicine, with the power of ayahuasca, or the name that you want to call it, we don't do anything, this can end up very bad. We have a lot of people that come to the jungle, spend 3 months in the jungle, come back to the Western world and consider themselves shamans and distribute this medicine with a lot of lack of responsibility. And basically it's in our responsibility, I think everyone that is here, to find that points in which ethics can get together and in which we can find that alternatives. Because basically we are seeing the biggest power that many of us knows getting destroyed by the misuse, then it's basically the responsibility of people that can put together a couple of very simple things. Then it's respect, basically, of everyone and everyone else, and respect the sacred space of this plant. So basically, what's the purpose of all of us here? To bring that, because that was one of the 3 excuses of the government of Australia this year to deny the religious use of ayahuasca or DMT in Australia, was it could bring to misuse. And actually the misuse is happening because this ethic is not clear and because we are not doing this properly with the government. So what can we do with this?
Thanks, Ken, Ben, and Jeff, and also thank you for moderating. Really grateful for your devotion and dedication to the field. My question is mainly for Jeff, but please feel free to respond as well. Jeff, again, much respect for your the process and the time and commitment you've given to the process of legalization for the UDV. I was wondering whether you've taken this step to the next level as far as the United Nations, whether there has been any kind of movement in going to the top and recognizing ayahuasca as a traditional plant, so we can just kind of trickle down into the different countries that way. My second point is a comment regarding kind of the mixture of the plants coming together. I know cannabis is oftentimes used in certain ceremonies with ayahuasca, and so just want to invite our friend and also other people to not point certain fingers, but the war on the war on plants and the war on people is kind of similar, and so just to be open to the idea of having different plants come together, but also with intention. It's mostly the intention that's coming through. And so, thank you all.
Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank you for setting the stage for a debate. And I have a simple question, and I'd like to justify it. Why is it that ethics is not the main analytical stream to follow? I mean that because in every decision making we do, in everything we do really, there's moral reasoning. And moral reasoning refers to what's right, what's wrong. And ethics relates to its, it's a position of right or wrong, it's binary. And ethics is the principle of it, it is morals reasoning and also morals justification. So it can approach every field we're studying really, because it seems to me that when we come here we see an overwhelming quantity of data and of fields being approached, and we don't know how to connect it all. But we know that maybe we're overlooking something that's moral reasoning, that is something that simply emerges from our experiences, I think. We come with a, right, why is it?
Yeah, so I think why is it we don't use ethics as an analytical stream to guide our studies? I think it would be really helpful to set that.
So let's maybe, we have 2 more and 10 minutes left, so maybe let's get all the questions.
I can't hold all that.
Okay.
Hello. Okay. So I wanted to say something in response to Ben's question earlier from the first 3 people that I didn't say. I think that when we encounter things that are going on that are questionable, that could cause harm to all of us, we have a duty to speak out. We have a duty to use the awareness that we're gaining here to address people and say, you know, really what you're doing here is not correct. It could end up harming other people, and to, as a friend, give orientation. I think that that's something that building a movement of consciousness is something that when we see people who are behaving in ways that are not correct, with the understanding that we've gained from being here and seeing some of the larger issues and how interconnected they are, we can speak from that. With respect to the question about bringing the success that we had in the United States to perhaps to the world community, the way that the international community is structured around these issues is through certain conventions and certain treaties that Ken mentioned earlier, that where substances become controlled or where there are plants with psychoactive effects, there are certain controls that are in place that are based on international laws and international treaties. And there's different ways that we're looking at addressing that. One of them is something that's going to be discussed here at the conference, which is the idea of ayahuasca as being a cultural treasure of humanity and being recognized by the United Nations, you know, cultural agency in terms of its value. They've already recognized, for example, the spices of the Mediterranean countries, of oregano and garlic and thyme. They're considered to be a cultural treasure of humanity. So why not, you know, this tea that comes from the Amazon and that awakens us to our true purpose? You could think that there might be a good argument for that, having that kind of consideration as well. And there's obviously a lot of considerations around that, but it's a conversation that's underway. But the way the international community functions, as Ken was also explaining, is that each country has their own right to determine their own laws. There are certain basic laws that are common to all, but countries can make laws that are more stringent than those laws, and so there's still going to need to be a work on individual levels within each country, even though there is more of an effort that's going on internationally as well.
I think also on top of that, education is crucial, no? In terms of what do we do with problematic practitioners. When people are really properly informed, I think they would have less clients. No? If you really you know, have access to good information, if you know what a safe space looks like, opportunism has less of a chance. So I think we have to work on one hand also in that sense. And then responding to problematic practitioners is something that I think is happening in a way, but while ayahuasca is kind of moving in this illegal framework, it's difficult because, as I said before, the fact that ayahuasca is involved automatically makes it illegal and a problem, and it is in that framework very difficult towards the authorities to distinguish problematic use or practitioners from responsible use. No? So I think as we move towards environments where we can create either regulated or tolerated environments for the use of ayahuasca, then we can also kind of distinguish more if incidents happen or if we detect problematic behavior, to be able to do something against that with more tools or more possibilities.
I would just echo exactly what you said, and Jeffrey's called for a duty to speak out. I unfortunately had to face that exact issue in Canada with a practitioner who is coming regularly and accused multiple times of molesting women, where it became, I never directly witnessed these events, but I heard about them, time after time, to a point where I couldn't ignore it. And with some leadership from actually BIA and others, basically wrote a letter that we put publicly on the internet denouncing this individual or warning people about the behaviors that we'd been hearing about. So I think that kind of thing unfortunately needs to happen if the behaviors are that egregious. Of course, what we're really speaking about in some ways is consumer safety, but there's a tension there with the commodification. In some ways we buy into the logic of commodification if we turn it into a consumer safety issue. That doesn't detract from the need to protect individuals. But I worry, there's been talk about, or I think there's some websites that are kind of like TripAdvisors for ayahuasca retreat centers where people can go on and rate their experiences and that sort of thing, which may be of some value, but I think is also of concern with respect to commodification and those economic issues that I spoke about earlier. So I'm not sure where I stand on that, but.
I wanted to add also on the AYA TripAdvisor type platforms, there's different ones, no? There's Open Mind Trips, AYA TripAdvisor, AYA Mundo. So these are, as Ken says, initiatives that maybe have some value as a place to look. But of course you have to be very careful, because if I open a center and I ask my 20 friends to have a very positive 5-star rating, how great my place is, others will read that and think, oh, this is a perfect place, go there without researching further. I think AYA Mundo is an initiative now, a new one, which takes it a step further and is more intended to bring together the community and allows for people who have gone to certain centers directly get in touch through chat with people who want to go there. So maybe that's more useful, no, instead of just leaving a testimonial. And also I think a lot of people might have a very good experience in a place, but not necessarily because it's a place that's very responsible and very well done. So not everybody might have the tools or the knowledge to really make a testimonial on site which goes into the important things, no? And so I think we have to be careful with those type of tools and see them just as another source of information, but definitely not the only one before going to a center.
We have 6 minutes left and 3 people who want to ask a question. So if you take 30 seconds each, then the responders will actually have time to answer those questions. So please be brief. Thank you.
Dennis McKenna. First of all, I want to thank you for having this very thought-provoking forum, and Bia for moderating it. I think this may be the most important conversation that is happening here, or one of the most important. But I want to have a comment and then a suggestion referring to something Jeffrey raised early in the discussion, which is that there is another partner involved here, and that's nature. And we hear much discussion about cultural context and geopolitics and religion and all that. We also need to recognize that what's going on here with ayahuasca and many other plants that humans value is a process of coevolution and symbiosis. And I think in the discussion about formulating policy going forward, it should be articulated clearly that humans have a fundamental right to form a symbiotic relationship with any plant in the environment that is useful to them, and ayahuasca is an example of that. Secondarily, a point that needs to be made that I don't see being made in policy discussions is the fact that DMT, nature is permeated with DMT. DMT is not an uncommon compound. There are tens of thousands of species that contain DMT. So to focus on only the plants that are used to formulate ayahuasca, I mean, this fact illustrates that this approach to control is not practical. I think that's a point that's worth making. Probably all plants contain some DMT because it's so close to primary metabolism. And another point that may relate to this that I've advocated for a long time in formulating drug policy, make a distinction between plants and drugs. Take plants off the table. They're not drugs. Let the drug control policymakers focus on extracted drugs from whatever source that are more potentially harmful. I'd like to see more discussion of that in policy formulation. Thank you. Sorry for that.
My question is about the commercialization of ayahuasca and how much popularity we're seeing in the growth of ayahuasca specific to mental illness, depression, PTSD, anxiety and other reasons that people are going towards it, and how do you minimize the commercialization in the next 5 to 10 to 20 years with the understanding that the popularity of ayahuasca will likely only continue to grow? What will that relationship be like in the next 5 to 15 years?
Hello, good afternoon. I just have some comments. My name is Gino. I come from Peru. Worked with Shipibos for some years. And I just wanted to go to the one of the values, who has the values of ayahuasca. And in my view, the only one that has the values of ayahuasca is the ayahuasca herself. She's the spirit of the plants, the mother spirit. Nobody has the right over her. Some people want to control her in the ceremony. They go on their free controls. No use. So let her be. Maybe it is what it is, and how it is exactly how it should be. Dennis was just saying about symbiosis. It's coming. It's going to take a long time. I've seen later, before they were talking about responsibility on the use of this medicine. I live in the Sacred Valley. I'm going to be short. And I have seen so many responsible use of ayahuasca. They even do parties, drinking little bits and dancing and everything. 90% of the foreigners living in the Sacred Valley use rapé daily, 10, 15 times every day. So what I mean here is probably Westerners are not ready for these plants. And what I see in Europe when I go do work there, people come, the demand is there for awakening. But again, they always ask permission to drink it by themselves when we're gone. And this is very risky. When you drink by yourself this medicine, even if it's a tiny bit that will do nothing sometimes, there will be one time that you will open doors, and this is not to freak anybody, that you don't want to open by yourself. So we have opened the bottle and the genie is released. Who is going to stop her? Thank you.
Okay, we need to end with this comment. We need to end there. Just one 1 minute, everyone. 1 minute, and we'll finish at 4.
So I want to respond to what Dennis said about the co-evolution, and I've thought a lot about why is ayahuasca becoming so popular now at this point, and I talked before about the new psychoactive substances and how very much authorities or prosecutors understand this boom of ayahuasca as people getting interested in another substance, to get basically loaded. But what we see, and even in our studies, we see, for example, the average age in our preliminary data of people coming to ayahuasca is, I think, around 35 years old. People who are at a certain point in their life and they want to improve something in their life. They're seeking to develop themselves, no? So really, I think there's a growing need that people have to have other ways and more holistic ways maybe to deal with their health and their development. And I think ayahuasca fits very much into that, and not so much as just yet another product to use.
I think just my final comment is an issue brought up earlier, the agency of the plants, and perhaps the moral shift we need to make is to move beyond the human-centered perspective to recognizing all the living beings on the planet as moral patients, at least, that we deserving of our moral respect, and thinking about how to live symbiotically with the other creatures that we share the planet with.
Great. Jeffrey?
I just want to acknowledge the power of a question in terms of its ability to raise our awareness. And I think that this is a conversation that maybe began here, but one that can continue together over the months and years ahead as we continue to examine these things so we could arrive at a more complete, unified approach of how we're going to take advantage of this moment in our history in order to bring about greater growth for the world we live in. And I thank each of you for your dedication to this.
Okay, before, no, you
One second. And I just hope that this conversation also will continue here in the next 4 days after today, so that,
So let me take a second to thank you, Ken, Ben, and Jeffrey for your excellent contributions, not only here, but to the cause overall over many years, and for your inspiring work. We will be breaking now and are back here at 4:15. So again, thank you all very, very much.